Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining Unmasking Our Whole Self, the third webinar in the Making Our Strong Community Stronger initiative, promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in the mainframe. Today's webinar is being recorded, so participants will be muted during the panel discussion. But if you have a question or a comment, we would welcome your participation through the chat. My name is Jeannie Glass, and I'm founder and CEO of Virtual Z Computing. For those of you joining our series for the first time, as the first female founder of a mainframe software company in history, I've been doing quite a bit of work in the area of women in IT. And through that work, I started learning about the active DE&I initiatives in our industry, but they seemed like best kept secrets to me. So last fall, I reached out to Greg Lotko, general manager of the mainframe business unit at Broadcom. And from there, we partnered with Rocket, IBM, Tech Channel, and the Open Mainframe Project. And it's been exciting and inspiring to see the impact and momentum that's resulting from all of our companies coming together to create this industry-wide conversation on diversity in the mainframe, with every event having greater visibility and higher registrations than the event before. So we're thrilled that you've joined us today. Thank you. With many of us returning to work and our offices in a variety of ways, we're continuing the Making Our Strong Community Stronger discussion by taking a look at how this past year has impacted DE&I and its connection to corporate culture. With that, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Dr. Gloria Chance. Dr. Chance is the CEO of the Musai Group and an innovative leader who believes in the spirit of creativity to enhance work environments. She's been recognized as the most powerful woman in banking for leading the creation of the first mobile application in financial services. And she's the founder of A Walk in My Shoes, a creative and effective diversity and inclusion event. Dr. Chance moderated our past Making Our Strong Community Stronger events as well, and she and our panelists have been working very hard over the past couple of months to create a dynamic conversation on unmasking our whole selves. And what we mean by that is the idea of some people feeling comfortable being their genuine whole selves at work, and others, especially those from more diverse populations, still feeling the need to wear a mask based on how they're expected to ask and not really reflecting who they really are. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Chance to introduce our panelists and start the discussion.
Thank you, Jeannie, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I'm not doing well today. That simple reply opened the door to long overdue conversations, and it was the first time that I empowered myself to share my whole self with someone at work. When we allow space for team members to share their diverse experiences and who they really are, we open the door for new discussions, better relationships, stronger leaders, and innovation. This is a quote by our esteemed panelist from Broadcom mainframe software, Allison Cook. Thank you for that comment, Allison, because it's so appropriate for what we're going to be talking about. This conversation is about inclusion. As we know, or if you don't know, many organizations are attracting more diverse talent. We're actually improving in that across all industries for the most part. But the challenge is inclusion, like how do we keep people? How do we retain them? And it goes right into this question we're talking about today. How do we create an environment where people can integrate themselves, especially their work and life, given the remote work that's come about based on the pandemic? So that's really the nuts and bolts of this conversation. Psychological safety. What is that? It's the atmosphere that's created that allows others to fully show up as their authentic selves. Now, as leaders, we all know we've been talking about our authentic selves forever. But now this conversation is going deeper because we're talking about DE&I and how that relates to others bringing their authentic self to the office. Creating psychological safety is an intentional act, and I want all of you to be intentional for me today. At each panel, I ask everyone in the audience to do one thing. And this is the one thing I want you to think about as we are going through this dialogue. As you hear or see tools, I want you to begin to think about one way that you can be intentional around creating a sense of belonging for a person or a team in your work environment. Those people or those teams where they don't quite fit in, they seem a little bit off, they're a little bit different, or you might feel some kind of way about their approach or tactics. I want you to think about that team or person, and I want you to be intentional after this webinar to go out and work with them. My goal is always, as a psychologist, to expand creative thinking that will improve performance while increasing human potential. And so in that, on behalf, again, of our sponsors and partners, Broadcom Mainframe Software, IBM, Rocket Software, Virtual Z Computing, Tech Channel, and Open Mainframe, we welcome you this morning, this afternoon, whatever time zone you're in. And we're going to get started now with the panelists. The panelists, we designed this. It's not based on anything other than the stories of the panelists, and it's based on their individual perspectives and not those of their companies. And I want to say, as this panel unfolded, what is clear, and I want you to track this as we're talking, is that we have two employees who I consider emerging leaders, which means that, we're all leaders. So they're leading, but they don't have a distinction of leadership in their title. And then we have other employees who are actual leaders who have leadership in their title. This is an interesting dynamic that we didn't create. It just evolved and unfolded as we were having dialogue. So let's get started. I'm so happy to welcome Allison, Earl, Kevin, and Tina to the panel. And Earl, let's get started with you. So last year, as we all know, a year and a half about, we've all been in this state of the pandemic, right? The pandemic has had control over us, but we've realized that we have less separation between work and our personal lives than we originally thought. But this idea about work-life integration and people seeing our backgrounds and where we live, et cetera, it does have an influence on corporate inclusion, and it does play out differently for different people when we talk about bringing our whole selves to work. So, Earl, what does bringing your whole self to work mean to you, and would you do it?
Well, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Earl Dixon. I work with Broadcom, a principal client consultant, and I am the tech lead for the Vitality program at Broadcom. And bringing my whole self to work for me means, bringing your culture, your background, where you come from, how you were raised, bringing all of those into yourself and bringing that to work. Now, you ask, would I do that? The answer is I don't. I don't bring my entire self to work. Throughout my career, I've worked with a lot of people, mostly white people. Let's just be very honest here. And the bottom line is, when you do bring your whole self, coming from that urban city life in New Jersey, coming from that rental assistance that we needed coming up, and telling those stories, you get a lot of ignorance from those people where they're asking you, silly questions like, well, have you ever seen someone shot, or have you ever shot someone? And you're like, what does that have to do with anything? I mean, I'm not ashamed of anywhere I come from or anything I've gone through in my life, but at the same time, I don't want to have to deal with that ignorance. So I don't bring my whole self to life in that aspect.
Wow, thank you for that, Earl. What about you, Kevin? And then Tina?
Yeah, so Kevin Norlin, quick background on me. I started with IBM over 30 years ago in the mainframe and also the mid-range, what was called RS-6000 and AS-400. And I worked at, big tech, legacy tech companies most of my career, Sun Microsystems, HPE Software, and now Rocket Software for the last 2 years. And for me, bringing your whole self it's kind of what you said a little bit earlier, Dr. Chance, is about making sure you have quality discussions and build relationships. I think it's all about that genuine connection and a quality conversation. And it may not be, as Earl said, it may not be about sharing your background, but just how do you really connect with people? And I think in a work from home environment, the virtual environment that COVID imposed on all of us, I think we have to show people it's okay. And we realize real life happens in a work from home environment. There's pets, there's kids, there's parents. I'm actually working in my garage. I've been here for the last year and a half, and I did an all hands call with my team, just showing people it's okay that they connect and they can let their guard down. I think versus having to feel like you're always on a show, right? And there's a song titled "This Is Me" from one of my favorite movie musicals, and it's all about just being yourself and trying to be comfortable with yourself. But I also think people have to be in a position that they feel comfortable and they can let their guard down. And sometimes that just takes time and getting to know others again in a different environment, and that can be a challenge in a virtual world.
Great. I'm Tina Tarquinio. I am the Director for Product Management, IBMZ at IBM. And just in case we run out of time at the end, I want to make sure I thank Gloria for all of her work in putting our stories together and for everyone being so open. It's really great to be a part of this. So to me, bringing my whole self to work as an employee means pre-pandemic, I could just say I need to leave at 4, and maybe I didn't need to say it was for a kid's soccer game or something like that. In the pandemic, it meant when school schedules shifted all over, I had to be way more open about at 1:30, wacky school schedule ends and I need to pick up kid number 1. And then at 3:30, wacky school schedule number 2 ends and I need to go pick up kid number 2. And there was really no hiding it. As a leader, I think I'm one of the people Gloria referred to as having a leader in my title. I was conscious that maybe I didn't want to share all those details about what I was doing when I had to drop or be in the car, but me doing that meant that the people on my team recognized it was okay to do that, or pick up their cat or take care of their parent or whatever it was that they had to do. So I was conscious that even though I maybe always didn't want to share, that it was really important that I did, so that others saw that that was an okay thing to do and that people were understanding and everybody moved on. So to me, that's what it really means.
Tina, but you're saying that you would bring your whole self to work.
I would bring my whole self to work. Every once in a
Okay.
while, I feel like I get into a territory where I maybe share too much, but in general, I do feel like I can bring my full self to work.
Great, thank you for that. And Allison, last but not least, and this is the author of the opening quotes, Allison.
Yes, and that was a surprise to me. I did not know that I was going to be speechless. So I was trying to act normal. But thank you for that, Dr. Chance. So my name is Allison Cook, and I am the program lead for customer engagement programs for the mainframe software division at Broadcom. And in terms of what does it mean to bring your whole self to work question, or what does your whole self mean? I really would echo what Earl said. It's my cultural background. As Tina said, it's the fact that I'm a working mom and, virtual school to kindergartner for part of last year while I worked full time. And it's all these life experiences that I have had. And no, to answer your question, Dr. Chance, I don't bring my whole self to work. And most of my 20-year career in IT, I have not felt comfortable to do that. There's only maybe been a handful of people that I've encountered along the way in my career that I really feel like I was my real self with. And for me, and I think Earl kind of touched on this too, when you're oftentimes the only one or one of few, whether it's a woman or a woman of color or a Black woman or a working mom or whatever the different things are that we can feel like we're the only one of, it's very isolating, and you don't know who will get you or who will understand you if you share and open up. And part of that for me comes from my background. And so my parents grew up in a really rural, segregated town in North Carolina. And at that time in that town, Black and Native American students were not recommended or suggested to go to college or further their education after high school. And so my parents were dating and decided they didn't want to raise a family there. And so they moved to Durham, North Carolina, and got their associate's degrees and started at IBM, and both had 35 plus year careers with IBM. But one thing they always told us was that excellence is the only option. If you want to be seen as equal to your white classmates, your white teammates, you have to be perfect almost. And so that obviously over time of growing up doesn't lend itself very well to being your whole self and sharing vulnerabilities or fears or concerns that you have. There's this pressure to be perfect just so we can be seen as equal a lot of times. And that's why I hesitate to bring my whole self to work.
Allison, that's so profound because we're talking about conforming, right? We're talking about there's a standard. Sometimes it is unwritten, but it's very clear that there's a standard. And so that is addressing or speaking to conformity. Thank you all so much for that. Tina and Kevin, two of the diverse candidates on the panel mentioned that they would not bring themselves to work. And as leaders, you said that you would. So can you explain more about how do you bring those two things together? Because how do you think about this from the context of the fact that this plays out differently for different people? A lot of times it has to do with level and it has to do with authority in terms of bringing their whole self to work. So can you just speak a little bit about this? Because if we're not bringing our whole selves to work, we're wearing a mask, but it's just not a mask to protect us from the virus, the pandemic, the COVID. It's to protect us from the virus that is, I don't fit in, or I'm afraid to let people know so that I won't fit in more. So can you speak to that, please?
Sure. Tina, do you want to go first?
Sure, I'll go first. It's the awkward part where we don't know who's supposed to go first. So I'll go first. I think as a leader, that's part of what you accept when you take a leadership role, right? I mean, you accept that you have more responsibility. The onus is on you to start those hard conversations you don't know where they may go, what questions may get asked, what you have to say, but that's part of the responsibility, I believe, of being a leader. Because when you have a team who brings their full self, it's personal success for those employees, but also business success, right? You have to think about the outcomes we want for both the individual and for our teams, right? And if they're not bringing their whole self to one WebEx, they're definitely not bringing their whole self to their whole job. And that's really what we want for the best outcomes. And I really think to bridge the gap, the leader has to take a bigger step forward and into uncomfortable territory, but that's what they take on when they accept being a leader.
Thank you for that, Tina. Kevin.
Yeah, well, look, to begin with, I don't think I've ever fit in. We just do our best and work our way through it. But, I think we all wear a mask to one extent or another, both in personal and professional situations until we get very comfortable with the other people in the group. I can say as an example, Rocket Software is owned by Bain Capital. And my first meetings with Bain Capital, I sure had a big mask up, right? Because it was unfamiliar territory, kind of intimidating. And now 2 years later, right, I'm much more comfortable and I have less mask because I know the people and lots of meetings and interact with them. But, no matter how much of the mask I think I put up, I've also realized I can't control what others think or say about me, either good or bad. The saying of you can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you respond and react. And, I think we do need to be all in, as Tina said, if we can, because it allows you to have a better connection and relationship, right? Whether it's with your partner, spouse, kids, coworkers, what have you. And when they get to know the true you can have just a more meaningful relationship and more trust, but it's definitely not easy. I saw similar, we all have interesting backgrounds. I grew up extremely poor on an Indian reservation, single mom, working multiple jobs. We lived in a trailer, had government food subsidies to get by. And, I had a phenomenal role model in my mom. I saw she was all in, right? She was her whole self all the time. And it was one of the best role models I've ever had in my life. And, I think being your whole self, I don't know if it's a privilege as much as it's just a commitment to be your best and to connect as much as you can again, with people.
Okay, Kevin, we're having an issue with your sound. So we're going to go ahead and move on. If you all can mute unless you're speaking, that would be great. So if we could, thank you for that, Kevin. We did hear the essence of your comment. And this is what I would ask Tina. I'm sorry, I would ask Allison and Earl. You've heard Kevin and Tina talk about that their reasoning behind why they think it's important to bring to not wear a mask. And so how would you respond to this? Because again, this is serious in terms of, giving more, potentially having better outcomes, et cetera. And so do you believe still, based on hearing that you wouldn't wear a mask? Would you think differently about this? What's underneath those feelings about not wearing a mask?
And I'll jump in there. I don't agree that with the mask. I would wear my mask on a daily basis at work. I mean, because you just want to ensure that you are really getting viewed for your actual work versus where you come from, what you've been through. I agree with Kevin in that, a lot of people wear masks when they come to work. You're absolutely right. But when we talk about diversity and ethnicities, being a Black man, that mask has to kind of always be up, and you have to always be on guard as to what you say, how you say it, because it may not be viewed when, I'm in a meeting and say, I may get a little loud in the meeting versus Kevin getting a little loud in the meeting. It may not be viewed the same way. A lot of times, and let's just be honest, I'm viewed as the angry Black man, versus, oh, he's just having a bad day. So, I have to have that mask up and be cautious when I'm speaking or talking, and not be too passionate about what I'm doing and wear that mask in that whole sense. I've had situations where I've tried to pull that mask down and talk with other coworkers. And this was a conversation with a coworker that worked on my team, and we just happened to be talking politics, trying to, get to know each other. And he turns around, and this was during the Obama era, and sends me a picture of Obama as a monkey. And I spoke to him and said, do you realize that I'm a Black man and that how offensive that is? And we had that conversation. I could have taken my mask down and become really angry, but I explained to him why it was offensive to Black people to show any Black person as a monkey, let alone the president. So, I kept that mask up and talked to him differently going forward. So that's why I tend to keep my mask on at work.
Yeah, Earl, that's actually, it has to be very uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to hear about that. And Allison, same question for you. How would you change your perspective on wearing a mask?
No, I wouldn't. And in my experience, sometimes, not every time, but sometimes when I have chosen to reveal parts of my whole self or remove that mask, it's resulted in disappointment or the realization that I don't really have the support from people that I work with or people who are my teammates or leaders that I think I do or thought I did, or that maybe I feel like I should have. And the example that I wanted to share for this particular question, I don't know if it was necessarily related to race, but it could have been. But a lot of people don't know that my husband is a veteran. So he served as a major in the U.S. Air Force for most of our relationship. And the big thing for me throughout all of those years of his active duty service was to be able to maintain my career in IT as we were relocated and restationed around the country. Well, several years ago, he got reassigned to move to the United Kingdom to a base in England. And it was really important for me to be able to stay with my husband and keep my job. And most of my years in IT that had been supported. And this particular time it was going to be supported. And I got right at the last minute, reorged and into a group where the leadership there did not support this move. And actually had someone in leadership, when I asked, do you think this is going to happen? Am I going to have to make a difficult decision? I had someone say to me, who do you think you are that you can just work from wherever in the world you want to? And they said, I would like to work from Paris someday, but that's not going to happen. And so for me, it was devastating. I mean, I understand how business works. It may not have gotten approved and I would have had to make a decision. But the way that that particular leader handled that was just devastating for me, because being a part of a military family and being with my family it was my priority at that time. So long story short, I ended up at the, like literally 3 weeks before, getting moved back into a team that supported the move, and I did get to relocate and keep my career. But it's one of those times where I was vulnerable and asked for support for something that was important to my family at work, and got a response that I totally was not expecting to get.
And, Allison, and you're bringing out a point that, psychological safety, or just understanding a person, and sometimes the swift decisions that we make can sometimes, we ruin lives sometimes just because of our indifference, or, that leader probably wasn't even thinking about implications. I don't know, but I'm just saying that something that was really huge to you, people may not have really understood. So it's so important in this concept of psychological safety to embrace discomfort. So that's key to creating psychological safety, where, it might be an uncomfortable conversation for a leader to have, but better for it to be uncomfortable and to have it than to let it fester. Because when you do something like what happened to Allison, had she stayed in that group for some reason, that leader likely would, have the same behavior in other places. And these small things that you let go of actually spiral into huge, huge issues for the team. So let's talk about difficult or discomforting conversations. Let's go, because we haven't talked about this on the panel, of the George Floyd murder. That was really the sort of thing that started a lot of these dialogues while we were having a pandemic. So I want to just briefly talk about Earl, because we also haven't had a Black male on the panel. Not that you represent all Black males either, but just curious if we start with you. What was your experience regarding this difficult situation and conversations that you had at work? Because again, everyone, psychological safety is about creating the space to have these really difficult conversations. So Earl, what happened to you? And then Kevin, if you can jump in, Tina and Allison.
Well, I mean, looking at the George Floyd situation, at work, I got a lot of sympathy and empathy with people apologizing to me personally for the situation. The whole situation to me was not shocking at all, because this has been going on for quite some time. And this was just the first time that it was captured by a third party, not a police cam, not the individual's cam, but a third party that was actually filming this young man being murdered by a police officer, and I heard a lot of things like, well, why didn't the people there do something? And the bottom line is, if any of those people, who were mostly African-American, had jumped in and tried to push that cop off or do something, they would be in the same boat as George Floyd was. And, as a Black person, that's not a position you want to be in, because you don't know if a routine traffic stop could end with your life being ended right at that moment. So, at work, I did talk to a few people about it, but for the most part, it was not a major topic that was talked about, other than people apologizing, which I really couldn't understand why you're apologizing to me, because this is something that I've seen and lived through for quite some time, and seeing all of the various murders, of Black men that were not armed. And so this was just the culmination of other people getting to see it and realizing it for the first time, that this is how some of these incidents actually occur, not just a police account of it or this person's account of it. This was a third person's account of it, and you got to see it for yourself. So as a Black man, you have to teach your kids and your young boys that now you can't even have them play with toy guns. Like, that's not even allowed anymore for young Black men, because you don't want it to be confused, even if it's pink and white. You just don't want those things. So, the conversation starting last year, it actually should have started many years ago. It's okay that it started now, but you know, what they saw with George Floyd is not where it started. It's just another incident in a long line of incidents. So I don't know really how to take, you know, wanting to have the conversation, but I would really like to have the conversation going forward of how we can all, as white, black, brown, whoever, come together and actually look at these things and actually understand them for what they really are.
Yeah, thank you for that, Earl. Thank you for being so honest. Kevin.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my audio dropped.
Yes,
real life.
we can hear you.
Last
Yes.
time. Great. So, you know, when it's about how do you create, you know, psychologically safe spaces to tackle, right, very tough topics. You know, I just say on the George Floyd situation, it was a horrible situation, of course. And for me personally, what I took away from it, it was a reminder that I need to take action when I can step in to help others. And not just stand by and watch something terrible happen because I don't want to get involved. And now Earl's point, look, police officers with guns, would I jump into that? Probably not. I mean, just being honest. I mean, I don't know who would, you know, kind of, that was an unbelievable situation and sad. So, but what I know I can do is I look at, again, there's the sins of commission, of which are things you have done. And then there's the sins of omission, which are things you fail to do. And so now for me, again, it's a reminder to stand up for people, either in the workplace or, you know, outside of work. Stand up for people that may not have a voice. Stand up and speak up for people that may be in the shadows or margins, and help and lift others up when and where I can. And I think that's, you know, it doesn't matter what level you are in an organization. You can stand up for what you believe is right, even if it's uncomfortable and you take risk. And you know, for me, that's what I took away. That's what I can do personally, right? I can, if I see somebody being treated the wrong way or not being respected the right way, I can say something. And if I don't, then that's on me. And I think that I'm not sure if I'm, you know, I just have to be able to step in and speak up.
You know, Kevin, thank you for that, especially as a white man to say that, because I can tell you that in my coming up in corporate, I relied heavily on, sometimes I wouldn't even address my own things. I'd go right to my white male counterpart or friend where we have this agreement and say, hey, dude, can you handle this for me on my behalf? So I think that is so important. So thank you for bringing that out. Tina and Allison.
Yeah, I mean, I think concerning the George Floyd events, you know, I think the first thing I did was acknowledge that I have no firsthand or secondhand, you know, real experience with something like that. And so, you know, it could have been easy for me to think I don't have anything to do with it and I don't have anything good to say, right? That feels like the right thing to say. But I think silence was way louder and said a lot more about me than speaking up and saying, I don't know exactly the details or what this feels like, but I want to know, and I want to listen to people that are, you know, feeling uncomfortable, feeling, you know, up and down, because I think we all felt up and down between, you know, what had already been happening in the world and then adding things just kept piling on, it seemed, right? So I think being open about, I don't know exactly what this feels for you, but I want to learn. And then, you know, you can't just say that, you gotta, you know, walk the walk too. So in July, my kids and I were visiting DC, and I took them to see Black Lives Matter Way, knowing full well I was entering into uncharted territory of parental discussions and all sorts of things. But it was too big of a thing to not have to show that this was important and it mattered and we were going to learn about it. And so
learning, thank you for that, Tina. Learning is another key, especially for leaders, to be open to learn. That's key to creating psychological safety for your teams, for sure. Thank you, Tina. Allison.
Yeah, so I'll just kind of, again, partly echo what Earl said. And I believe that time in 2020 when George Floyd was murdered and the weeks and months following that, I mean, it was one of the most difficult times of my career. And I think what was most shocking to me was that everyone wasn't as appalled and shocked as I was. And so to me, it felt like it isn't just how are your Black employees doing, but how is everybody doing? And the quote that Dr. Chance read to kick off this town hall actually when I told someone on a one-on-one conversation last year, I'm not doing well today, it was because of the impact of the murder of George Floyd on me and on my family. And during that conversation, the person that I was talking to, and I know that they didn't mean or intend for it to come across this way, but they said, I just don't watch it. I turn off the TV, Allison. I don't look at stuff like that. And I think my big thing that I would ask for leaders to do is to watch it and don't look away, and pay attention to those things that are very difficult to watch, because if you're building the diverse teams that you want to have, then 9 times out of 10, your teams are going to be impacted by stuff like that that's happening in the world. I mean, my husband is a dentist, a Black man, and we were raising a Black daughter. And last spring, he did not feel safe driving to the dental office at night to do paperwork. He wanted to be home before the sun went down. He did not feel comfortable. And when you're personally impacted by that, but still have to go about the day with that mask on, being professional and getting through conference calls, it's really difficult. So I think it's important for leaders to be aware of what their teams are dealing with.
Yeah, that's so important. You know, research states that microaggressions have increased actually as a result of the pandemic. And partially that's because of the remote work, because we're in a quiet environment where people, they're really not being monitored, right? This sort of one-on-one screen time. And just for those who don't know, microaggressions are the everyday verbal, nonverbal, and environmental slights, snubs, or insults, whether they're intentional or unintentional, communicated with hostile, derogatory, or negative messages to target a person based solely on their marginalized group membership. And a lot of times these things are done intentionally, like Earl's earlier point about the person, again, not giving them a pass, but putting it in context to have the nerve to bring up the monkey comment. That's a microaggression. That's something that probably wasn't intended, it was ignorance, but it still impacted Earl. So I want to talk a little bit, just so that people understand on this call, an example of what microaggressions are. So can you share, Tina, Earl, and Allison, an example of microaggressions that you have experienced, Tina?
Yeah, and I do think that most times people are well-intentioned and they don't mean to insult you, but there's lots of cute little nicknames. I've been called young lady, which people think is a compliment.
Sweetie, one of those, sweetie, honey.
Right.
Yeah.
Nobody's saying young man to the other men at the table. Or I remember one time at a conference, we were in a group of leaders, and there was foul language, which was fine by me, but I was the one apologized to for, oh, sorry, I didn't see you there. Well, I know how to use the F word.
You're really fragile. Yes.
Right. So I think it's those types of things that just slip right in there that, kind of death by 1,000 cuts. Like, those are the types of things I see. To me, the monkey is not a micro, that's macroaggression, but I think that's the type of stuff that slips in.
For sure. And also I think that on the other side, though, it's hard because you have to train people and get them to understand, right? Because then you have other people putting masks on because they're like, oh my God, I'm and we all see this. People don't want to say the wrong things. I mean, that I see that a lot. And so I think that's important to understand as well. And so that's about having understanding of each other as well, and also seeking to ask questions. So what say you, Earl?
Yeah, I could tell a million stories about microaggression and what have you, but I have one that it was kind of funny to me, but at the same time, it was just a lack of, I guess, knowing what the person was doing, but I don't think there was any ill intention. So I had just gotten this job at a company just probably 20 plus years ago, and I was in HR talking to the HR lady. And back then I had dreadlocks that just kind of flowed all the way down. So they were very long. And so she saw it, and this is a two-part. She she wanted to touch my hair for one. And that is like, to me, a sin in of itself to ask someone to touch their hair, and then the second thing that the same person did was she was like, you've got to meet someone. And this was a young white lady, and she takes me and she's like, just follow me. You've got to meet this person. And she takes me over to the desk of another Black man that had dreadlocks. And I was like, oh okay. Oh, hello. I mean, we had nothing in common other than the fact that we had dreadlocks. We worked in different departments, but I didn't see why she felt a need that I had to meet this other Black guy with dreadlocks. I mean, it would be the same thing if I was the HR person and she, let's just say, was a blonde haired, blue eyed lady. And I said, oh my God, you've got to meet this other lady who has blonde hair and blue eyes. She would take offense to that. And I took offense to it, but at the same time, it was like, she just doesn't know any better.
Yeah, exactly. That really is a big part of it. And I'm going to go ahead and move on from this question. Research states that curiosity is important, and leading by example is also important. So asking a lot of questions. I think Tina's mentioned this often about she's always trying to learn and seek to understand. I think that you, Earl and Allison, you've given some great examples about some of the things from your perspective of that you're challenged with. So this whole thing around psychological safety tied to that is leaders should be curious, because that's how you learn and grow. It also will help you create a safe workspace, because it also shows that you don't know everything as a leader. A lot of times we stop conversation because when we're a know-it-all, people are like, there's no point in me even making a comment because this person is going to know it all. So Kevin, can you share an example of how this sort of openness that you talk about, that you have, and the ability to learn, and be curious with your team, how does that work out for you? How does that work?
So look, I really like this question, and that pun is intended, about being curious and asking questions. I sometimes feel like, I'm a 4-year-old, and for those of you that have young kids, my kids are grown and gone, but they always ask why, because they're always trying to learn. And I think the best leaders are like that. And one thing I tried to do when I joined Rocket Software, and I'm not saying this is the role model to follow, but I had a one-on-one meeting with every person in my organization. And it took me almost 5 months. It's a global team, and it's just a logistical challenge. But I wanted to make sure that I connected with those individuals. It was extra work for me, but I wanted to understand our opportunities, our challenges, our products and customers, but I also wanted to know a little bit about themselves. And my favorite part of the call, because I kept kind of a consistent pattern, was we talk work for a while, and at the end, I would say, I just have one more question. What do you do for fun outside of work? And that's when the whole dynamic changed. And you could tell they just they lit up, and they're like, they talk about their kids or their partners or vacations or exercise or whatever. And it gave just a different way to connect. And they weren't expecting it, that I was actually going to be interested in them. And so for me, it's about how do you connect with people, and with questioning, you can learn about them and find some common ground, and not just be coworkers in the same organization.
That's great, Kevin. Thank you for that. Yeah, being curious and wanting to know something about the other person actually will pull out something that they might not have shared in the past. So Tina, how do you approach this?
Well, first, I just want to echo what Kevin said. I used to jump right into a one-on-one that I would have with the leader, and I'd go right to the IBM, career discussion type of stuff. And then a year ago, I had someone say, whoa, just tell me about you first. And it really repositioned everything. And that was a big learning moment for me. So now when I meet with someone for the first time, I'll say, just shoot me an email with, a little bit about you and not what's on your LinkedIn profile, or say something like that to kind of jumpstart the types of conversation. And I think the other key aspect is not everybody likes to communicate in the same way, right? Some people do it over email. Some people really like Slack. Some people are all emojis. You got to find the wavelength that works. And that's really important, right? Because you have to be adaptable as a leader to all of them, but you got to find the one that works. Some people like to walk, or we used to like to walk and have a one-on-one, or some people are no camera, all camera, in between. So that's something I try and do, is just find the way that they're most comfortable. And even if they're a little slow starting, I'll open up with me, I usually start with, I'm work at IBM, but I always said I would never work here. And then it's a funny story of like, well, how the heck do you end up here? And then we kind of like, get going that way.
Well, exactly. Stories are funny because I know Earl and Allison both said, we're saying we won't take our mask off, and they're taking their mask off in front of, hundreds of people as they're talking about mask, right? So life is that way. And we're hoping that through this conversation, Allison and Earl will begin to, as they're opening up, sort of help in the leadership of the importance of, sort of that mask. How do you look at it? How do you think about it? How do you balance it? So let's move on, Allison, and let me understand what you think companies should do. When we talk about bringing your whole self to work, it does put the onus on the individual, and usually it's the marginalized individual, the individual that doesn't have power. So what do you think companies should do in terms of improving, creating the psychological safety space?
So I kind of put this in the frame of what we've all been through this last 18 months and what we're still going through. And I think employees, we've been asked by leaders and executives to just take on so many things in very uncertain circumstances. So everybody come and work from home, and your kids are going to sit beside you and do virtual school. And then you're going to go back to the office, but now there's a Delta variant. So I don't know what that means for everybody, but there's just been so many expectations on employees, in addition to your standard, business objectives and goals and performance and development goals. And we're going to meet our numbers, and we're going to win, and we're going to keep our video cameras on while we do it. And we're always going to be happy. It's been a lot on employees who are not in leadership positions. And so I think, some days, especially, I'll be totally honest, and I know some of my team is on here, so they'll get it. But for me to bring my whole self to work, it means I don't want to be on camera, or I don't want to be on 20 conference calls. I'd like to just sit and work today because I'm just totally drained. And I think employees need to feel like their leaders and the leadership that they are under get that. And that I think it's important that leaders acknowledge and recognize not only the business wins, but the emotional toll that all of their organization has been through these last 18 months, and that they recognize it and give people a safe space to talk about it if they choose to talk about it.
Yeah, that's so true. Kevin, I'm sorry. Do you want to jump in? Kevin, can you hear us? Okay, I don't think Kevin can hear us. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. So when we look at, I want to make this point because it is important. We've been talking about performance, and we know that diversity, equity, inclusion, research is definitely pointing in the direction of, hey, we have got to step up and do this stuff for the benefit of our companies and also our society. Research says that racial and ethnic diversity are 33% more likely. Companies who invest in that, they are 33% more likely to financially outperform the median companies in their industry. And then also the top quartile for gender diversity, they're going to be at about 21% more likely to have financial returns above the median. So this is an imperative now, a competition, a competitive imperative. It's always been, but the data is there now to support it. So when we talk about these unsafe environments or psychologically safe environments, stress and anxiety, to Allison's recent point, are critical to this. And we're not talking about EAP. You know how we would send people to EAP? We're not talking about that anymore. Stress and anxiety are becoming a big part of how we operate today. And so what I want to know from the panelists, what do you think about how mental health should be handled in the current environment? Because this is something that leaders have to get on top of and understanding as well about stress management, anxiety management, et cetera, around all of these new things. So Tina, why don't we start with you? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, as a leader, I would say that, maybe a year ago, I got comments like, I don't know how you're doing it. Or I made a comment to my manager at the time, like, oh, there's been a few days I've been on the brink. And he said, oh, are everything looked great to us. To me, I never noticed. And I thought, oh, I'm doing a real disservice because people think I've somehow figured out like to manage all of this. And I certainly have not. At one point I joked someone was going to fire me, IBM, my husband, my kids, or all three. But so I tried to just be open about the struggles, or I would say I'm not camera ready right now. And I'm really lucky that at IBM at the time came out with, the work at home pledge, right? It started in one of our units, and the top was like, I pledged to be supportive of not being camera ready all the time. And there was a series of things. And so really making sure that, even if I felt the need to try and be superwoman, that I was open about, I'm not, and, we don't all have to be all the time. And, just really asking people and suggesting to people, are you getting outside, are you getting fresh air, really pushing people, because you could start to see in the beginning, we all had like a hero, we can do it. And then the marathon kept going, and, people were getting worn out. And to your point about a business success, that was affecting things, but really it's about personal success, and we needed people.
Exactly. It's really about that mental mindset shift that drives everything. So Allison, just real quickly, and then we're going to move on to the next question. What are your thoughts about the bringing sort of this concept of mental health being important in the environment?
That's been a huge concern for me over these last 18 months and ongoing, and the lasting impact that all of this will have on us as humans and as employees and parents and all the other roles that we play. And I think Kevin and Tina mentioned this, and this was actually something that I had in my notes, but it was just to ask how people are doing and to really mean it and to really have time to hear their response. I think we are so used to, obviously not on like a huge conference call, but we're so used to just saying, how's it going? I'm fine, move on to the agenda. And so to really make space and time for people to give you the honest answer and be willing to hear it and support them through whatever the answer may be. But just making space and time to hear how people are doing.
That's for sure. And I love the Simone Biles story where she actually, and a bunch of people are starting to do that, saying, hey, I'm not mentally well. Mm-hmm. That's so important, because from a performance standpoint, just regrouping, and for leaders to get regrouping mentally can really help increase your performance, especially if the leader supports that employee who's struggling. So thank you all for that. As we start to wrap up, we want to talk about building team values. That's another key to creating a psychological safe space. Kevin, can you share with the audience what you believe are critical components that you've worked with in creating psychologically safe spaces?
Yes, you bet. So, I'm lucky. I know I'm very fortunate. In Rocket, our corporate values are actually humanity, empathy, trust, and love. And even if those aren't your values in a company, you can still execute with those. And it's not to hit our revenue targets. It's not to hit EBITDA. It's not to build a product. It's about our people. And I think our teams really need to know that and be recipients of that approach. I personally, I was lucky back in Q4 of last year. I was going through our forecast and our revenue projections, and our CEO stopped me and he said, Kevin, I don't even care if we hit the number. I just want us to do things the right way. And that's, how do we treat our people? How do we support our teams? And it was just, it was a huge reminder to me that looking after our people is the number one priority. And they really have to see it. They have to have the positive impact of knowing that we believe in them and we're committed to them above everything else. And I think if we can do that, you can unlock amazing outcomes for them personally as well as professionally for a business.
Thank you for that, Kevin. And Earl, what are your final thoughts about building team values in terms of creating what would make you comfortable taking off more of your mask around creating team values? What would be your advice to companies?
I think leaders should really listen to their employees. When there are meetings, allow everybody's opinion to be valued. Don't discount someone's opinion because it's different than yours. You may believe one thing very strongly, but you still have to listen and value what another person brings to the table. That way you get a different synergy, because if they're not allowed to get that full thought out, that they were going through because you're already making a judgment on that opinion, then they're going to pull back and put more of a mask on. So I think it's just having those open dialogues and allowing people to be themselves and express themselves, and of course in a professional way, because we are in a profession. But I think having those open dialogues and allowing people to have value, that is the key, I think, to everything. They could be very wrong, but if they feel like they have value when they gave their side, then I think they can accept that better than just being knocked down each time. And I think that, where I am right now at Broadcom, I think we do a much better job than my previous work of allowing people to have some kind of value when they're speaking. You get to speak at these meetings and you have a lot of value in that, and you respect that a lot more from the company because you actually feel like they're actually listening to me.
That's really so key. And as we wrap up, everyone, we want to thank all of the panelists for this dialogue. There's never enough time to complete all of these, but as we wrap up, I want to make clear that there are really two things to think about. There's psychological danger and psychological safety around wearing a mask. And this is what danger looks like. People have a fear of admitting mistakes. They blame others. They're less likely to share different views. And that's danger. That's when you're in the danger zone. Good psychological safety looks like there's comfort when people can admit their mistakes, when they learn from failure, when everyone openly shares their ideas. You get better innovation and decision-making on the team. Because we know fear is paralyzing. So if you have a team that's built on fear, or people who have fear in your team, you are headed in the psychological safety danger zone. So these are tips that we talked about. We want you as tips to focus on learning, not executing. But this actually does give you results that are very helpful. We want you to encourage experimentation and support the exploration of ideas on your team. That opens people up and they will bring things to you where they will even surprise themselves. We want you to demonstrate curiosity. Even managers have plenty to learn, so let your team see that. Acknowledge your own fallibility. Be transparent about your own mistakes. The best stories you can share, like me, is like when I ran into a wall, or just be human. Let people know that you're human, because that will help them open up to you. Embrace discomfort. We talked about creating a safe environment is about confronting tough topics before they become big issues. Survey the team. Make sure you ask the team how they're doing. How are the things that I'm rolling out supporting and helping you? And finally, build team values. Make sure that, yeah, you have company goals, like I love Rocket's goals of love, but also make sure that you have your own individual team sort of personality and how you build personality and psychological safety, because it really is based on the personality of the team. So again, I want you to create a set of written norms in this space so that you can be successful. And I hope that each one of you have figured out what you're going to go back and do to make a difference in the psychological safety of your teams. So as we wrap up, we want to make sure that if you want to share your reaction as we've run out of time to this discussion, there will be a town hall tomorrow at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 noon Eastern. And we will have this town hall just so that if you want to ask questions, get advice on something, et cetera, that you'll be able to do that. We'll send out a link. I think the link is in the chat, but we also will send out the link in an email for all registered attendees of today's event. And finally, in October, we'll be hosting another installation of Making Our Strong Community Stronger, and we'll be hearing from our customers in the mainframe industry, and we'll hear what they believe is important in this space. And again, I'm Dr. Gloria Chance. You can follow me at Dr. Gloria Chance on all media. And on behalf of our sponsor partners, Broadcom Mainframe Software, IBM, Rocket Software, Virtual Z Computing, Tech Channel, and Open Mainframe projects, it's been our honor, the panelists, Earl, Allison, Tina, Kevin, it's been our honor to spend this time with you. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.